Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Schools Forum. My name is Andrew O'Neill and I'm the current chair of Schools Forum for RBKC. This event is being held on Microsoft Teams and also being streamed on YouTube. Members of the public and the media are welcome to watch the meeting remotely and listen to the discussions taking place. All forum members, council members and the parties who wish to participate in this hearing are joining from remote locations. As this is a virtual meeting, I would like to run through just a couple of bits of housekeeping for all participants. Can all parties participating ensure they remain on mute unless they are called to speak? When you do speak, please feel free to put your camera on if you would like. And if you wish to speak at any point, I'll be monitoring the chat box, as will Hannah. So please type your name and question into the chat box. And if you could use the hands up function when you like to speak, and also remember to put your hands down. If for any reason your connection drops out and you miss something, please can you let us know. In the event that my connection drops, the nominated person will be who, well, if I'm not the chair, it will be either that chair or it will be the nominated vice chair. I'd now like to introduce myself and the fellow committee members. My name is Andrew O'Neill. As I said, I'm the current chair. In our primary sector, primary schools, head teacher.
I am here.
Hi, Jagdeep. Sarah Bouette. Hi, Sarah. David Sellens.
Hello, everybody. Happy New Year, if you're still allowed to say.
Hi, David. Happy New Year. I should have said Happy New Year at the start. Apologies. And Kathleen Williams.
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, Kathleen. Primary school governors, Peter Bassett.
Here.
Hi, Peter. I can see you there. Alison Mould.
Yes, here.
Chris Blewett.
Yes, I'm here. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Chris. From secondary schools, myself and Amanda Sayers.
Yes, present.
From secondary academies, we should have David Benson. Lawrence, are you taking David's place?
Yeah, I thought David was coming, but he doesn't seem to be here.
OK. From Chelsea Academy, Mariella.
Yeah.
From the Carlin Vaughan, Stephen Keogh.
Here.
From an introduction from our nursery school to Michelle McWalter.
Michelle is present, but she's struggling to turn on her microphone. But she is
Okay,
here.
right, thank you, Hannah. From the special school, Jeanette Steele. I think Jeanette's here. She's present, but maybe a microphone issue there. From the Pru, we should have Wasim Butt, who is currently not here. Then councillors, we should, moving on to non-schools councillors, we should have Councillor Aretti.
Here.
Thank you, Councillor Aretti, and also Councillor Atkinson.
I'm here,
He's
but
here,
I'm
but he said
participating by phone.
Okay, great, thank you. And Councillor Evans.
Hello.
Hello, Councillor Evans. And from the PVI forum, I think we've had apologies from Claire Dimpfel, and 16 to 19 we've had apologies, I believe, from Craig Hanlon Smith. Okay, I'm going to hand over now before we begin.
Sorry, Jeanette Steele, my mic's come on now. I'm here.
Okay, thank you, Jeanette.
Thank you.
Before we begin, I would like to hand over to the clerk, Hannah Davenport, to proceed with the appointment of the chair. Hannah, over to you.
Hi everybody. So in the early weeks of January, I reached out to the committee members to seek nominations for the election of the chair and the vice chair. So I'm going to deal with the chair and then hand over to that elected chair to appoint the vice chair. So I received one nomination for chair, which was for Mr. Andrew O'Neill, who is also our current chair. So unless there's anyone who would like to not agree, am I okay to go ahead and appoint Mr. O'Neill as the chair? Is that positive? Agreed. Fantastic. Thanks very much, everybody. Please speak now if anyone has anything to say. Fantastic. Okay, passing you back to you, Andrew. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you, Hannah, and thank you, everyone. Much appreciated. We have also received one nomination for the role of vice chair, and the nomination was to Alison Mould, who is also our current vice chair. Are the forum okay to agree Alison to continue in that role as vice chair? Okay, yes. Fantastic. I can see lots of hands up there, so that's great. We move on then. So I would also like to appoint, I mentioned in the introductions, I would also like to appoint Michelle McWalter as the nursery representative and welcome her to her first schools forum meeting. We move on now to apologies for absence. Hannah, I think we just have, as I mentioned a few moments ago, Craig Hanlon Smith and Claire Dimpfel. Are there any other further apologies?
Not that I'm aware of, and just to confirm, I think David Sellens has also now joined the call. So
I think David Benson. I've just seen
David Benson. Sorry, yes. David
Great,
Benson.
thank you. Welcome, David. Okay, moving on to A3, which is declarations of interest. Do the other members have any other declarations to make? No? Okay. Moving on to item A4, minutes from the 8th of November 2021. Are there any comments on the minutes of that meeting? Please put your hands up if you have any. Okay, great. So item A4, the minutes of the meeting on the 8th of November have been circulated. Is it your wish for them to be signed off as a correct record? Great, thank you. I can see hands up. We move on now to item A5, 2022-23 DSG, falling roles, growth and de-delegated funding. Anita, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. So
The paper and the appendices reflect the DSG settlement that we were issued with in December. Table 1 under paragraph 2.2 shows that the schools block has increased by 4%. The high needs block, now also we have an addition of supplementary funding. You'll see in that table of 778,000, and that's supposed to help local authorities manage their high needs pressures. Once we include that in the high needs funding, there is an increase in high needs funding of 13.2%. But you'll see as we go through the papers later that unfortunately is not going to. We are still going to need a transfer from the schools block to the high needs block due to pressures on the high needs expenditure. As you know, for next financial year 22-23, we will still continue to set a local funding formula, and we don't yet know the outcome of the government's consultation on the move to the hard national funding formula. Moving to the table at paragraph 3.5, which is showing the proposed calculation of the total budget to be allocated through to schools. And we've got to go through some of those items and forum can take the decision on those. But if they all go through, there will then be an average 2.4% per pupil increase compared to the 21-22 budgets. And you'll remember that the option that was agreed for the formula for 22-23 was no change to the current formula, which was based on moving 25% towards the national funding formula in 21-22. And the minimum funding guarantee is the balancing figure. So all of the figures are updated and have now got all the roll numbers from October, all the free school meal data from October, low priority attainment, etc. And so Appendix A shows, I've called them provisional allocations. They should be pretty much the final allocations, but just because the DFE have to sign off our return. And for maintained schools, they are the budgets before the dedelegation. So an extra 2,698,000 compared to 21-22. Appendix B, you've got the formula factor values. And Appendix C has got the roles for each school, and overall you'll see there's an increase of 133 pupils, which is an increase of 176 in secondary, but a reduction in primaries of 43. And of course, the numbers include the Afghan evacuees that were on the October census. So there is a one-off increase in those numbers for some schools. So if we look at the growth recommended, so in accordance with the criteria that was agreed in the June forum, that would mean that Fox and All Saints are the two schools entitled to growth funding. And also, in accordance with DFE requirements, Kensington Primary Academy will get a final post-opening grant allocation of 21,000. I wasn't going to say anything about the falling roles as we've got the separate paper on that. Paragraphs 4.9 to 4.11, they cover the continued funding of traveller children, or a teacher for traveller children, and the dedelegation for trade union duties and restructuring costs in maintained schools. But unfortunately, because there's a forecast overspend on the restructuring costs, and in line with what had been agreed when we set up restructuring, that any under or overspend on restructuring costs would be adjusted in the following year's budgets. So that means that we need to dedelegate more for restructuring. And paragraph 4.12 is referring to the DFE consultation on removing grant funding that the council used to receive, school intervention and brokering grant. That was used to fund statutory school improvement support and intervention for LA maintained schools. The DfE have now confirmed that after the consultation, they will be reducing all local authorities' grant by 50% from April, and which would be 65% in Kensington and Chelsea, and then that the remainder will be removed from April 2023. So the proposal is that this funding, the DfE proposed then that this funding is de-delegated. So that's another item that's added to the de-delegation proposals. I'll just mention section 6 as well. There's a new school supplementary grant, which all mainstream schools will receive in addition to their formula budgets. It's partly to cover the health and social care levy on the national insurance contributions, but to allow for any potential increase in teachers' pay and COVID response and recovery. We've got an indicative amount for Kensington and Chelsea of 2,290,000, and the final allocations for each school will be confirmed in the spring term. So, you know, we're hoping we get those pretty soon and we can get those out to you. But it does detail how in the paper how it's, you know, a fixed sum per school plus an amount per pupil and an amount for 3 school meals. They're the main points that I wanted to draw out. I will pause for questions and comments.
Okay, forum members, do we have any questions for Anita? Chris?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to go back to 4.1, I think it was. No, 4.9. And I do have to declare an interest here because, of course, I'm Chair of Governance at Oxford Gardens. So it's just a general inquiry. I've had some discussions over the last year, 18 months, with, I think, Ian, or it might have been Richard, about the funding, the total funding pot for traveller children. There's a disparity there, but David and I have met, but not properly yet, in relation to unpicking that for all the obvious reasons. Is there something that there's still some wriggle room after this meeting, or do we have to approve this as is? As you can see, there's a bit of a history here, which I won't go into, but we get match funding from a charitable organisation to support the work that we do with our traveller children. Chair, should I take this outside? And I, as I say, I do have to declare a vested interest, so it might not be entirely appropriate.
Yeah, I think this is the overarching picture of things. It might be more appropriate to take the finer details of any funding up with Anita outside of this meeting. Anita, are you able to make contact with Chris on this matter so that you can clarify and have a little bit of time to look into some of the finer detail of it? Is that possible?
Yeah,
So,
I mean,
yeah.
that would be lovely. I mean, I do have to apologise for getting around to these papers rather late because I have raised this both last year and the year before. But these are difficult times, I know, but I'd value that if I could just talk through that again and obviously talk to David when.
I do need to add that obviously once the agreements are made at this meeting, we need to agree the budgets because we have to submit the return to the DfE by the 21st. So
absolutely, and Mayor Culper, as I said, I have raised it on two budget cycles. But, you know, I'm not going to go to the wall about it. Clearly, this has to be agreed today. I just want it on in the minutes that I'd quite like to have that discussion in the future again, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Peter?
Yeah, just a simple question. The school supplementary grant funding in paragraphs or section 6, I take it that's in addition to the monies, main monies outlined in Appendix A?
yes, it is.
It is. Thank you.
Yeah.
There's a couple of other hands here. Ian, I can see your hand up as well. Ian?
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, really briefly, good to see everybody this evening. Chris, in answer to your points, I'd be really happy to support a meeting with Anita if that would be helpful. Obviously, Anita's rightly confirmed that the figures are, due to be agreed this evening. I think it probably relates to the difference in numbers of traveller children, but both Oxford Gardens and the KA as the larger school, but also probably worth flagging that actually the intention of the funding and the proposal here is that there is also support for other local schools as well, both at primary and secondary. You may have smaller cohorts of traveller children, but happy to join that meeting with Anita, Chris and David if that'd be helpful.
That's great. I just wanted to flag it here. I've got no intention of messing up the cycle. Clearly it needs to be agreed today. So thanks, Ian. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian, for clarity there. And Jagdeep.
Anita, in 6.2 it says that there'll be an area cost adjustment for higher wage areas. Do you have any idea of roughly how much that will be?
Yes, it's about 19%.
That's significant. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Jagdeep. Anita, just a couple of points of clarity. At the start, you talked about SEN funding and the significant increases. My understanding, if you could just confirm, just for forum members, is that is due to the significant increase in the number of EHCPs that we've seen in the borough in the last 2 years.
So it's a mixture of things, but we will cover it in other papers. But it's there's been a significant increase since our last report, and that appears to be about part of that is to do with increased costs, as in partly how the banding tool is working, not just about the increase in numbers. But we'll come on to talk a bit more about that.
Okay, just want to note it here so that we're clear on the impact on DSG going forward. And then also just maybe as a point of clarity and just for some future thinking, we've got mentioned restructuring costs and the need to move some money across from the school's block to cover that in this year. Given the declining roles in primary schools and the need and actually the reality that there's been more and more restructuring, does that need to be re-looked at in years going forward as to what the impact may be and whether or not there's enough money in that pot?
I think that would be a really good idea. Part of this is to do with the reason why it seems to be particularly high in the current year is that we've got a number of it's some of the early retirements through restructuring. So we don't see some of the scale of the numbers in every year, but I think it would be a good idea to keep the size of this under review, Andrew.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, because I think if we can afford support to schools who are going through these pressures where we can, then we probably need to look at that in advance and strategically plan what funding goes into that pot in the next couple of years. Any further questions there?
Andrew, just to highlight that Michelle's asked a question in the chat because I think her mic isn't working. Just to read it out, she's asked, are nursery schools entitled to any of the funding in 6.2?
Anita.
I think it's 6.2. So that's been so the funding for nursery schools is in, my understanding is that's included within the way that the early years funding has been calculated. So it's not going to be a separate grant. I understand it's within the overall early years funding, which is covered in the separate paper.
Okay, thank you, Anita. I hope that answers things, Michelle. Okay, so if we move on, there's now, usually I would read through each of the things to agree. They're all on the bottom of section A5, and it's to agree the recommendations in 8.1. There are about 9 of them, and there's quite a lot of them. So rather than me read them aloud to you, which was going to take about 15 minutes, I reckon, if we could just read through them now and agree, given the conversations that we've just had and what we've just discussed, to agree all the recommendations in 8.1. If you put your virtual hands up, that would be really helpful to see where we're at with that. Thank you, Peter. Okay, fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for that. We now move on to item A6, which is the review of falling roles funds. Anita, I think that's back to you, isn't it?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so remember that this came to the November forum, and then the forum asked for further information and wanted to know what the roll numbers were for October 21. So there's more detail in the appendix, and the recommendations that have been put forward for consideration take account of the ESFA guidance that ideally we should only be giving funding where a school will revert back to original numbers within 3 years. And as you know, we currently give funding for schools with falling roles in Kensington and Chelsea where there's a fall of more than 5%, and we fund the age-weighted unit, the pupil-led funding element. 27% of schools have had a reduction in roles of more than 5% between October 2020 and 21, and we know, and as has already been mentioned, that is an ongoing trend that will continue. So the suggestions to be considered by the forum, and which are all modelled within the appendix, are about taking account of the size of school balances and whether schools that have balances above those considered excessive, and it's not my wording, it's the DfE's wording, whether they should no longer qualify for funding, and that would be schools that have balances of more than 8% of their budgets for primary and more than 5% for secondary. Also, the funding we give should be pegged at 80% rather than 100% of the ORQ, and whether the funding should only be allocated, so whether a school should only be able to get the funding for 3 years rather than at the moment it can continue indefinitely. The reason why these are being put forward for consideration are obviously any funding that is used to fund schools with falling roles is taken from the budgets of all the other schools. But I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, questions from forum members. Alison.
Hi, Anita. It was just in relation to the statement you make in 4.1, which was sort of a legal statement that local authorities may set aside schools block funding to create a small fund where local planning data shows that the surplus places will be needed within the next 3 financial years. Do we have that at all? Do we have evidence that these surplus places will be needed within the next 3 financial years? Because if we don't, then according to 4.1, we can't do this at all.
That's a really good question, Alison, and the answer is no, we don't have that. Oh, we don't have that. Ian, did you want to come in there? I'm happy to, I can go after you. I'll let Ian come in.
No, happy to. Now, Alison, that's a really helpful question. And through discussion at the last forum meeting and at the Education Partnership Board, you know, we don't have that prediction of increased numbers in primary. So I think it's a really helpful reflection for us as we consider this evening whether actually there should be a change to the falling roles criteria. Clearly, there's something about supporting the schools through those changes where they're temporary, but I think it's a really helpful point for us to bear in mind as we look at the range of criteria changes that are being suggested tonight for discussion.
I was just concerned that in principle we were able to make this decision.
So we've had our criteria as it was, and we've been fully open with the DfE as to what our criteria is, and that's always been accepted. Therefore, we would I've got no reason to think, even though the guidance says this, no reason to think it wouldn't be accepted.
Okay, thanks, Alison. Amanda?
I'm sorry, my point was a different one, but following on from Alison's point, surely if this is the statement by the DFE, schools forums should first vote to decide whether or not to take that advice or to set aside a fund. I don't think we should be considering the recommendations if we haven't at least agreed it in principle. That would be point one. And then I've got, once we decide that, then I'd like to make some comments, please, on the recommendations.
Okay, well, I mean, I'll open this up to forums,
yeah,
because I think that there's a reasonable point there. I mean, are we in agreement that as a forum we should have a small fund to support good schools with falling roles? Because we're looking at this irrespective of the data that I think we're hearing doesn't exist in the primary, but my guess is in principle we want to support schools who are struggling at the minute, particularly smaller primary schools. I see lots of nodding heads, so I'm kind of thinking we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. We have to support schools with who are struggling, with whose roles are falling off cliffs at present, whether or not the planning data shows that there's going to be a surge in pupil numbers coming forward or going forward. Okay, so Amanda, shall I come back to you, because there seems to be, from the faces I can see, agreement on that point.
So is that a formal vote that we just had to say yes, we should continue?
Yeah, I mean, those hands went up and then went down, and it was the majority of hands there. Unless, is there anyone who would disagree with this and say that we shouldn't be supporting schools with falling roles?
Chair, would you like to do a formal vote? Because I can put a poll in the chat, or are you happy to continue as we are?
Yeah, okay, let's test out our IT skills here, Hannah.
Okay, if you give me 1 second. So would we want 2 options or 3? So what is the question? Do we continue to support?
Should the local authorities set aside school block funding to create a fund to support good schools with falling roles? It's almost that first line from the paper, and let's keep it simple as a yes or no.
Sorry, Andrew, I thought it was important in principle that we agree that we're able to do this before we then decide on how we do it. Yeah, no, agreed. I'm very much feeling for Hannah now, who's under loads of pressure to put a poll together while we all sit and wait. So we're all rooting for you, Hannah.
It should be in the chat as we speak. There should be a live poll, hopefully.
It says no responses. Oh yeah.
If people could vote using the poll rather than putting
I'm not
in the chat, that would
sorry, I'm getting chat. I can't access chat, sorry to say, but I can put my hand up.
Okay, Amanda. Yes. Yes. Is there anyone else who can't access the chat who'd like to maybe record their result separately? I'll give it a few more seconds, but it looks like a unanimous yes.
Yes, looks unanimous. Well done, Hannah. Okay, Amanda, back to you.
Sorry. Yes. Okay. So regarding the recommendations, I strongly believe those schools who have a balance above the level should not qualify for funding. We're really sort of on our uppers as regards money, and I think it should be reserved for those who really need it. Although I strongly support that the idea of supporting schools like that. I personally disagree vehemently with the idea of limiting allocation to schools for a maximum 3 years in a row. If we exist in a situation where the local authority does not intervene and leaves it up, something I feel very strongly about, and leaves it up to governors to sort themselves out, the idea that just because they haven't been able to amalgamate with something else or come up with something because for whatever reason it doesn't work or it takes too long, that you then pull a rug from under those governors' feet at the end of the 3-year cycle, I think is wholly inappropriate. If the local authority wishes to terminate funding, believes the school is not sustainable, then I really do think something should be done at whether it's council level, authority level, whatever. But I don't think we should be doing this in what I would consider a rather underhand way. And then my point 3, sorry, this is all very strongly held opinion, sorry about this. If we're going to do it, I think we should be doing it 100% of ARPU, not messing around with percentages, etc. These schools need help and we should be fully helping them. So there you go, that's my 2 penny worth.
Thanks, Amanda. Unlike you to have strong opinions, but there we go. I'll bring Ian in here. I think my understanding from DfE guidance is that they set the tariffs, or they set the regs around how many years and what the percentages should be. But hopefully we may get to an agreement on this. Ian?
I'm just going to bring Anita in just on that point you've just raised, Andrew, if that's okay, then come back.
Yeah, that's entirely up to us in terms of how much we allocate and for how long.
Thanks, Anita. So just on those 2 points, Andrew, if that's helpful. I mean, the first thing I would say is that we know the DSG is already in deficit and will continue to be in deficit. So I think it's really helpful for us to have a conversation about the amounts of funding we do allocate to falling roles. It's great to see that Forum is supportive of that continuing as a fund. And in relation to the other points, Amanda, I think what I would say is it very much relates to the school's budget position. So I think Anita may correct me, we have 2 schools in deficit currently, whereas schools in deficit, they need to have a licensed deficit recovery plan in place, first agree with their governing body, and then also with the local authority. That plan would come to Anita and her team, ultimately to myself and Richard, and we would then advise Forum whether we can support and license, if you like, that deficit recovery plan. Now, where a school is in financial straits, can't agree its own deficit recovery plan, set a 3-year budget plan for that matter, let alone come to us to license it, then there is a real challenge for that school about whether you know the overall budget setup, the staffing structure is viable, and whether that school is viable. Now that's not where we are currently with any school here in Kensington Chelsea, but that I think would be the point where you might describe the local authorities to be intervening, where we're unable to license a deficit recovery fund for a maintained school. Hope that's helpful.
Just on that, Ian, I see there's two hands up. And or Anita, do you factor into that existing revenue reserves? Because obviously there's a different state of play if a school has used up all of its revenue reserves and has falling roles, as opposed to a school that has, you know, significant revenue reserves and is entitled potentially to falling roles funds. Is that factored into the deficit recovery plan? And I suppose I think we've been here before. How are they monitored and scrutinised?
So the answer is absolutely factored into the deficit recovery plan. And for schools in deficit, they have to send in a monthly return, which we then compare to the deficit recovery plan, which is so that we can take early action if we need to and provide early support if things are going out of line with the recovery plan.
OK, thank you, Anita. Chris, over to you.
Thank you. Amanda's stolen my thunder. That's pretty much exactly what I was going to say on all 3 of those things. So I'm not going to repeat it. The only thing I would add is that whilst we've got an update review, the ISOS piece of work, whilst we're all continuing to work on this, and I think there's been great progress as far as I can see across the piece, there is no logic to the 3-year cut-off point at all. But in every other respect, as I say, Amanda took the words out of my Amanda took the words out of my mouth, so I won't go over it again. Thank you.
OK, David, over to you.
Yeah, the only thing I have to add is The appendix, which has the graph with the information, the spreadsheet with the information, I just think it would have been so much more helpful with the future in mind and the ISOS group, as and when we do meet again, to afford some context, because there are schools here, looking just at this spreadsheet without any context, one could be forgiven for thinking that more families have chosen to send their children there, and of course that isn't the case. With some of these schools, it's presenting a slightly false picture because of the refugees who arrived and were placed, and I think that's ever so slightly irresponsible. With no malice at all, Anita, and I don't know if it was your decision to do that. But I do think it needs to be rejigged, and it does need to be rejigged with context applied so that there's some reference to, I don't know. I'm guessing because we're such a small authority, which schools their roles have gone up slightly, maybe by 10, 20, 30. I know some schools their roles have gone up quite dramatically, but that is primarily because of that situation. And the reason I mention it is, if those individuals, those families, were going to be placed within housing within the Royal Borough permanently, then it wouldn't be an issue. Amanda's point about over 3 years, that's very helpful. But I've been told, and heads have been told in meetings, that isn't the case. They've been told that this is a temporary measure, that whilst some of those families may well be settled and live permanently within the Royal Borough, almost certainly the great majority won't, and although they may be with us for a while until a permanent solution is found. What happens then to particularly those schools that did, up to the point at which those families joined their schools on a temporary arrangement, what happens to those schools if those families do depart in the next year or two?
Thank you, David. I think that you've raised a very good point there, because we could see some of these vulnerable schools falling off another cliff one financial year down the road. I think Sarah's got her hand up. Sarah, do you want to come in before Anita?
Yeah, I'll come in on that one. Oh, are we echoing it?
Let's do some mine. Shut. You go.
Okay, sorry. We're in this. Ian and I are in the same room and still figuring out how to use the IT equipment. But David, you're absolutely right. The Afghan families are here temporarily, very unlikely to be placed permanently in Kensington and Chelsea, unlikely to be placed permanently in London. I think there are probably a maximum of 5 properties. So they are here temporarily, and we should be reflecting that.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So we need to come to an agreement on the falling roles. Anita, is there, or Sarah, a potential solution on this where we maintain status quo?
The only thing I want to say is, because I think there seems to be...
Sorry, as I say, Ian and I are working out the IT. I think it is a temporary position. We should be reflecting that in all of the information so that we all understand it as temporary, and therefore the status quo in terms of this issue should remain. The Afghan children shouldn't be counted in this year's sort of picture of making sense of the falling pupil numbers.
And if I could just add to that, now you all know I'm in the same room as Sarah, we can absolutely reproduce this chart, I'm sure with Anita, if that would be helpful, David, showing the temporary impact of evacuee children on the rolls in a separate column. We can do that. I see Anita nodding, so thank you.
So just for clarity, in terms of moving the meeting forward, Anita, if I come back to you, are we pausing on the recommendations in 7.1 and really 7.12? Are we able to return to this? What's the impact on submitting the APT? Is there an impact on that?
So I thought only from what's been discussed at forum, I thought that there were at least a few members that wanted to do wanted to make the first change, but not the other two. 6.1.1, the ones about the level of balance, but not to change the other. If 1, 2 or 3 or none of these are changed, that's absolutely fine. It's absolutely the forum's discretion, and you know, we will obviously follow the forum's recommendation on this.
Okay, Amanda, you've got your hand up. Do you want to comment on this?
While I completely take David's point, I don't think it actually impacts this paper at all. Those schools who have got Afghan evacuees know fully well that they're temporary measures, and obviously are working with the local authority anyway at how they manage their budget over the next few years. It's obviously given them a little bit, if they were at risk, it's given them a little bit of wriggle room, should we say, to perfect their budget, to make the changes. But these points here are forum points, and I really think the Afghan situation is irrelevant to making decisions on these 3 points.
Okay, any further comments on this then? Jagdeep.
As somebody that has to manage quite a lot of this, I suppose I should come in and say that actually I agree with Amanda, because the costs are still there for the children, and therefore just because costs have gone up or they've gone down, or you've got more children or fewer children, the schools just have to be deaf when you're managing these things, and therefore you know, when we need to work with the local authority to do that, we work with the local authority. But you know, that's something that we will have to manage when we come to that situation. In one of the schools that I manage, and I know that the other 4 schools affected, where they've got additional children, yes, it will have an impact in a year's time or thereabouts. And I'm sure that when it comes to the future and people start moving back to London, we will all want to position ourselves in order to attract the children that come back to the city.
Okay, thank you, Jagdeep. Okay, so if we press on, ask the committee to note the report and the recommendation 7.1, that's to change the following roles criteria to Part A, and Anita, correct me if I'm wrong here. Schools with estimated balance above the levels considered excessive by the ESFA should. Well, are we keeping the 100% ORPU rate?
Hang on, sorry, Andrew, we're not noting these points. We've actually got to vote on each one of these points because we have different views on the different points.
Okay, so are we voting on each of the parts here? Okay, so Part A, Hannah, how are we going to do this? I think we're going to have separate polls here, given what how the discussion has been. Is that okay?
Yeah, I can do a separate poll for A, B and C if that would work.
Yeah, that would be great.
Can I raise or do a thumbs down then for my vote, because for some reason I haven't got the chat.
Okay, yeah, just if you talk to me verbally, and same as anyone else, if you can't vote in the actual form, either put a yes or a no in, or an abstain as a sort of a text message in the chat, or just speak out loud. So give me 1 second.
Sorry. Hannah, we don't have the chat.
Yes, no, yeah. So either write it in the chat or just speak verbally. That's fine too.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll read through just for the point of clarity. So Part A, schools with estimated balances above the levels considered excessive by the ESFA should no longer qualify for funding. And that's primary at 8%, secondary at 5%. B is to limit allocations to schools to a maximum of 3 years in a row of 4. And C, maintain current criteria funding 100% of the ORPU rate or reduce allocations to 80% of the ORPU.
Chair, are you happy for the options to be agree, disagree and abstain?
Yes.
Okay, give me 1 moment, everybody.
I'm not quite sure how that would work for point C.
Well, it's either agree to maintaining the current criterion funding of 100% or PU, and then it's agree or disagree with maintaining the current criterion. Hannah, have you got that?
Yep, so I put them all as agree, disagree, and abstain. So I've just put them labelled as Part A, Part B, and Part C. So please refer back to the actual text in the paper to sort of make sure you know which one you're voting on, if that's okay, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm just launching them now, so they should be in the chat.
I'm not sure that does work, Andrew, because C is an option. It's either maintain or, so we can't agree or disagree with it. We have to agree with the first part or the second part.
Presumably, if you agree with the first part, or if you disagree, you're agreeing with the second part. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, all three should be live in the poll in the chat now.
Hannah, can you put me, sorry, it's Amanda here. Can you put me down as an agree to A, disagree to B, and disagree to agree to C.
Agree to C.
Yes.
Sure. Okay, if we just wait a few more moments because we're not getting that many results through at this moment. So just to remind everyone, there are 3 votes to be taken here, both Part A, Part B, and Part C. So make sure you've voted on all 3. I suggest we give it maybe another minute just to get some more votes through. If anyone's struggling, please do let me know. We've got considerably less responses for Part A, so can everyone double check that they've definitely responded to Part A?
Hi, Hannah. I've submitted my votes, but it keeps coming back and telling me to submit again.
If you've submitted it, it should be fine. I think it should only be able to vote once.
Okay.
So I'll close them in just a second, and then that will mean more voting. I'm just leaving them open for a second. Chair, are you happy to continue now at this point?
Yes, I am. Do you want to, Hannah, would you be able to read out the poll results so that forum members are clear on what's been voted for and subsequently agreed?
Sure thing. Okay, so for Part A, which if I just read out what that is in the recommendation, so that is schools with estimated balances above the levels considered excessive by the ESFA should no longer qualify for funding, primary 8% and secondary 5%. So if I go back to the results, that is looking like an overwhelming agree. So that's 8%. Well, more than nine people agree and 1 person disagrees. So that is agreed. Everyone's happy with that. And then moving on to Part B, so to remind everybody, that is to limit allocations to schools to a maximum of 3 years in a row. And the results on that are a little more mixed. I think that is an overwhelming disagree, with 4 people to agree, 8 people to disagree, and 1 to abstain. So that I think that goes for as a disagree. So that is not agreed to. And then Part C, finally. So Part C was to maintain current criterion funding 100% of the AWPU rate, or reduce the allocations to 80% of the AWPU rate. So our responses to that are to agree it, with 9 people agreeing, 2 and 2 disagreeing. So just to confirm, we have agreed that one. So I think, as my understanding, Andrew, that we are maintaining the current criterion. Is that the understanding everyone follows?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
Andrew, I'm very disappointed as unless I'm sort of missing something, that the voting members are substantially more than 10. So I'm really surprised we've only had 10 votes on that.
Well, let's assume that if they haven't voted, they're abstaining.
So we had abstentions, did we?
Well, I can't see any. Oh, we've had some, but
I'm just really concerned that people's votes didn't come in properly.
Well, in terms of how we're operating in this meeting, I think we're going to have to go with the system that we've presently got. And Hannah?
What I can do potentially I can view who's voted in what way, so I can put that information together and circulate it after the meeting, so that if anyone sort of thinks that a vote has not come up in the way they intended to, that can be changed following the meeting. Would that satisfy any doubt?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Hannah. Okay, and then item 7.1.2, to note the resulting allocations that are given will be subject to individual schools submitting their business case for approval in March 2022 schools forum. Okay, thank you, everybody. Well, I honestly didn't think online schools forum meetings could get any more dramatic than last January, and I think we've just managed it just then. We move on now to item A7, which is 21-22 DSG monitoring. And Anita, over to you.
Yes, me again. Thank you. So I've already mentioned, something about the headlines on this paper. So we are now forecasting an overspend of just over 3 million on the DSG, and that is a significant worsening since the last report to the forum. The early years overspend, the majority of that, it was agreed by the forum quite rightly in June 21, where we paid the underspend relating to 21-22 out. So that's expected. There is a forecast overspend on the CENIF budget in early years of 85,000. And while the CENIF panel are going to review the eligibility criteria and approval process, that does need to be brought under control, or the only other way that we can fund it is we'd have to reduce the hourly rates in order to fund an increase in CENIF for early years, and that's not something that I would think that's not something that the forum would want us to do, but I'm just pointing that out as that's in this paper. The overspend on the schools and central schools block of 193,000 is mainly on the school reorganisation costs, which have been mentioned. The high needs block, so there is obviously the separate paper on high needs, but I'll just pick out some of the headlines here. So now an overspend forecast of 2,234,000, increasing numbers of children with EHCPs and the placement costs as well. And this is where we've got the big increase of 727,000 compared to our last projection. You've already, Andrew, you already asked the question about this. So yeah, due to increasing numbers of plans, but also the banding tool giving higher allocations, and we'll cover that a bit more in the high needs paper. And there's some in the paper details some underspends and overspends and what's causing those, but we know that the implementation of the new banded approach to the top-ups has seen a significant increase in the funding for individual pupils, and we knew that we were anticipating that there should have been an increase, at nothing like the scale that was flagged at the last forum. It's much more than that. So there will be recommendations reported to the High Needs Review Group at their February meeting, and with some outcomes and recommendations of that review will need to be brought to the March forum with we'd need to make some changes from April 2022, because otherwise the trajectory on the high needs spend is worrying. So when we look at the in-year forecast overspend, that means that our cumulative DSG deficit will increase to nearly 8.4 million by the end of this year. That's very close to the deficit management plan, but the concern is that is over 1 million higher in the high needs spend than we had in that plan. So that's why that area is of particular concern. And that's covered the main points that I wanted to make from that paper without covering all the high needs stuff in the separate paper.
Yes, thank you, Anita. Are there any comments or questions to Anita on this? Peter?
Yes, thank you. I mean, there seems to be some very challenging forecasting going on or occurred, or challenges to the forecast. It is at the bottom of page 3, this high needs block, significant overspend. In one case, if you look at the second line, top up academies pre-college pre-16, the new estimate, the new forecast is over twice the budget. I mean, is this all banding, or is this more people coming in? I mean, we must be able to get a grip on this, better grip on this, just to see where we are.
I'll just go back to remind that when we set the high needs budgets for 21-22, we knew we were going to have an overspend on the high needs block. We knew that the funding that we had available when those budgets were set in January last year, we knew that there was going to be an overspend. We weren't allowing for any growth. So we always knew we were going to have an overspend. But you're right, Peter, and Julie Ely might want to come in and just mention about what's happened with the growth in numbers and the banding.
Thanks, Anita. Yeah, we'll just share, obviously preempting the high needs block paper, but we are seeing an increase in volume. So the number of referrals of children with SEN and number of EHCPs much higher than we'd anticipated. Just to give you, just to put some flesh on the bones there, in the previous year we'd had 91 requests for assessment. In 2021 we had 146, so talking about a 60% increase in the number of referrals for assessment. So there's a volume increase, but the banding issue that Anita's talking about, as I say, we're going to bring it to the high needs working group to have a look at it in detail, but we've started working on the review, and what we can see already, some pressures around the banding value that has been attributed to children who are presenting with social, emotional and mental health issues is significantly higher than we had anticipated that it would be when we did the modelling before we rolled it out. So we're talking about volume and price pressures. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. There's a question from Michelle in the chat box. Are we looking at reducing the high needs funding available to schools rather than increasing, as it appears that there is not enough allocated to meet the needs? Julie or Anita, do you want to come in on that? I think that there's some historical conversation around this, that there's just not enough money in the high needs block, and this is a nationwide issue pretty much. Julie, is there anything else on that?
I think what I want to say is we are working on a very detailed review. We will have to, come with some robust recommendations to the working group about ways forward, because what this monitoring data is saying is that, to continue as we are is unaffordable. So, we will need to look at how do we make sure that what we have going forward is affordable. And thank you, Andrew, for drawing out, this is a national issue. High needs block pressures are being experienced in almost every local authority.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. Peter, have you got your hand back up there to come back in?
Very briefly, I was very pleased to hear Julie's comments. I mean, we can't go on spending as we are much as we'd like to, I think is the point I'd make. So thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Peter. Sarah, over to you.
Yeah, I'd just like to come in there and say, as a school that's experiencing increasing numbers of children with very high and significant needs, I think if we have to be really wary about just placing the problem with schools, because these children are here and they need us to support them. And I am worried that without any decent amount of funding to do that, it's going to become increasingly difficult for us to include children in our schools. So there's just such a tension here, I know, but I think we have to really make it clear to the government that actually the money is needed.
Yeah, absolutely, Sarah. I think if children and I think that Julie's done good work on this. If children meet threshold, then they need an EHC plan. We can't not include our children, really, can we? Ian, did you want to come in on that point that Sarah's making?
Indeed, and also just picking up on the question that Kathleen's put in the chat as well. So a couple of things. I think we absolutely do need that detailed discussion at the High Needs Review Group. There's clearly something around the banding tool that we need to explore in a bit more detail. It's a 3-year rollout. We're into. And we've done 2 years. Julie will nod or shake her head if I've got that wrong. And we have sufficient numbers of children who've been through the banding tool so that we have sufficient data to assess where we might need, by agreement with Forum Century, to tweak that, make some adjustments from April. Yet there is rising pressure nationally. Equally, we have had, as Anita said earlier, a 13.2% increase from April. We are tied in to a deficit recovery plan for the DSG with the DFE, and given that we're £1 million off, as Anita said, we're going to be challenged on that. And Kathleen's point about the arrangement our neighbours in Hammersmith and Fulham have reached with regards to their high needs deficit. We do have a deficit, but we've been told by the DFE that our deficit isn't big enough yet for any such arrangements, whereby basically some of the deficit is written off on the basis that you deliver within a certain budget each year. We're not in that position. So my advice would be we need to get back to the review group, understand some of the pressures, what we can change and what we can't, mindful of the legal thresholds for children that come forward. The last thing I would say is I know that Julie, Steve Comber, colleagues doing a great deal of work across the borough to help everybody be really clear about what is ordinarily available for children identified as SEN support at all ages without necessarily reaching forward for an EHC needs assessment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Okay, some good discussion there. Peter, have you got your hand back up? Oh, no. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. I think we'll probably come back to SEN in a few moments. And actually, this is an issue that we've obviously been discussing for many years now. I think probably every schools forum is having exactly the same discussion around lack of funding in the high needs block. So I asked the committee to note the report and the recommendations that are contained there in 4.1 that you've also all got in your pack of papers. They've all been outlined and highlighted by Anita throughout the course of that discussion. So many thanks. We move on now to item A8, which is early years budgets for 2022-23, and I think Poonam is going to lead this item.
Hey, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so paper A8. So this paper goes through the indicative early years budgets for next financial year, 22-23, and the attached appendix at the end, Appendix A, details the methodology behind the proposed hourly rate for providers. The focus of this paper is the early years entitlement for 3 and 4 year olds, which constitutes the bulk of the funding, and which is also subject to pass-through and some other requirements that I'll go through in a minute. So Table 1 on the first page sets out the initial allocations across the 6 funding streams. You'll see there that there's a net reduction in the 22-23 indicative budgets across 3 to 4 year olds, universal and working family entitlements. This is despite an increase of 17 pence in the early years national funding formula hourly rate. And this is due to lower numbers of children based on the January 2021 headcount, although this will be revised in July 2022 to take into account the January 22 census data and then revised further the following year. So after setting aside the budgets for deprivation, the SEN Inclusion Fund and Contingency from the 95%, the hourly pass-through rate has been calculated at £7.05 an hour for 22-23, And this is an increase of 15 pence from 21-22 rate of £6.90. This represents a 2.1% increase versus the 21-22 hourly rate, and also mirrors the ESFA's national hourly rate increase. The full calculation behind this is in Appendix A. The 22-23 hourly rate for 2-year-olds has increased in line with ESFA's national hourly rate from £6.67 to £6.87 an hour. Budgets for the early years pupil premium, the disability access fund, and the maintained nursery supplements are ring-fenced and so excluded from the hourly rate calculations above. But it is worth noting the changes to these funding streams in sections 210 and 211 of the report. In particular, the net reduction in the maintained nursery supplement for Kensington and Chelsea, which will be reflected in the payments made to the maintained nurseries accordingly. That's all I had to pick out from the paper. I've seen some questions earlier in the chat, which let me know if you want me to address those now or in a bit.
Okay, thank you, Poonam. Jagdeep, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Andrew. I'm just, there was a conversation earlier about the fact that there is an increase to school funding through the supplementary grant, and that enables schools, will enable schools to pay for the increased costs for national insurance, etc. Now, it was said that the increase to the hourly rate makes up for that in the earlier allocation. Now, I've just done a quick back of the fag packet calculation, and I won't work out the increase to be 2.17%. That wouldn't cover the national insurance increase and the other costs that are coming into nursery and earlier settings. So are we absolutely sure that there's not going to be any other supplementary grants for earlier settings? And also, if that is the case, I think the pass-through rate is not going up by enough to meet costs. Thank you.
Thanks, Jagdeep. Poonam, back to you.
Yeah, thank you for that. So the increase of 2.1%, we have matched the ESFA rate increase. I guess it's out. Yeah, it's a separate discussion whether this is enough to cover the increase in costs. But in terms of what we're passing on to the providers, we have matched the hourly rate increase that we've had in our allocations from the ESFA. Yeah, I don't have anything else to say on that, but I can. Sorry.
Sorry, I'll come in, Poonam. So the guidance from the DFE is that there isn't a separate funding, that the funding is included within the early years overall allocation. And as Poonam says, we've passed on the percentage increase, or proposing to pass on the percentage increase that the borough has received for these early years pupils. So I'm not, within the pot of money that's available, there's very few options as to what we do, following the regulations of what we're allowed to do and not allowed to do. But yeah, I can see that could lead to some issues.
Okay, so on this, are we going to note that we're matching what the ESFA recommendations, but the forum, and it'd be interesting to see if there's any other views, because I think Jagdeep's made a strong point there that what's recommended from the ESFA is just not enough to meet need. Is that the view that other forum members have? Irrespective of what we agree in terms of what the reality is and what money is in the pot, we just don't feel there's enough. Are there any other views, particularly from those who are involved in early years budgets?
Hello, hi. So may I come in?
Hi, Heracles. Yes.
Hello. Hi. Thank you. So, thank Jagdeep for raising this issue. This is something that the sector as a whole has raised with the DfE, and in my discussions with the DfE, we have highlighted that the sector doesn't feel that the amount that has been allocated to early years is going to cover, obviously, the increase in other areas. So in practical terms, I think that there are organisations lobbying, obviously, for early years that have highlighted that the funding that has been allocated to early years over the 3-year period is simply not going to cover those costs. So I think it's a well-known issue. But as Anita said, so far, nothing additional has been confirmed. We are hoping that the DfE will listen, but I agree with you. So, and your calculations that long term, it isn't going to match really that the increase in other areas.
Thank you, Heracles. I mean, there just seems to be a trend here with every pot of money we arrive at, isn't there? Heine's block, DSG, early years budget, so there just isn't enough money for us to really do what we'd like to do. Peter?
I just, I mean, we don't assert ourselves very much as a forum. I just wondered whether the chair could write to the minister and copy it to the members of parliament on this issue, whether, or whether representations should be made through officers. I'm not certain, but there are other lobbying we can engage in, which I've just outlined.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. I think it may be worth, well, Ian's coming in now, but maybe worth a discussion, Ian and Anita, separately out of this meeting on what you've just raised, Peter. I think we'll be lobbying on all on all income streams, to be honest. But happy to make representations from this forum to the DfE. I'm sure it'll fall on deaf ears by the way things have gone the past 3 to 5 years. Ian.
Yes, a really helpful point, Peter. Thank you. I mean, clearly you've heard Miraculous that he's absolutely lobbying, as our early years lead with his DfE contacts. But it's something Sarah and I have just discussed, and we have to take that point away. As Andrew has said, it's another area of pressure for us. But really have to take those points back and continue to lobby, and if you like, do our bit on the part of K&C in that area as well.
Thank you, Ian. Sorry, Sarah, I didn't see your hand up there. Sarah.
That's okay.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I can probably add a bit more to that, Peter, because the directors of children's services across London have written to ministers about the lack of funding for early years. It's as with all of this, we've said it. There's national recognition that there's a lack of funding in high needs early year, probably across all of the schools' budgets. Probably if we look across the whole of children's services, we know there's not enough money in the system. But certainly this is something we have to make representation about, because we have to have the best start for our children.
Yes, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Councillor Rendell.
Hi, Andrew. Hi, everyone. Really good question, Peter, there. I'm really happy to make representations on a political level. I work really closely, of course, with our 2 MPs all the time, and happy to write go into bat for us, I would say, from a political level with both the DfE and HMT if necessary.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Heracles.
Hello, thank you. So I just wanted to mention, following on from Sarah's point as well, that there is a group of heads of early years in London, and obviously this is going to be one of the key items for our next meeting, which is in a few weeks' time. And we have close links with the LGA. There is a strong lobbying group for early years, so we always make sure that we feed back, but we would welcome, obviously, any feedback or any support, if you like, from other groups as well, including the Schools Forum. But as Josh and Sarah said earlier, it would be really important to make sure that we voice those concerns to the DfE quite early on. As Sarah said, the DCSs in London we wrote on behalf of our network, and the DCS is signed off, if you like, our letter, and the DfE got back to us to pretty much say that they feel that the funding they will be providing for the next 3 years will be meeting the needs of the sector, which we all felt was not the case. So we will be pursuing this further.
Chair, if I may.
Who's that? Jagdeep? I can see Jagdeep's hand up. Oh, is it Councillor Atkinson, by any chance?
Yes, it is. It is. I'm sorry, I'm on the phone, so I can't put my hand up and I can't see who else is waiting to speak. I think we've got a proposal already that's been put forward that the forum writes to the DfE and copies both members of Parliament. I would urge that we do. I think that the more letters that are sent from, particularly from non-political, and we're not political in this case, sources, it helps to draw attention to the issue. And I would remind you that there are elections in May, so we're more likely to get a rapid response. And I think in the letter we send, we should say that when the DfE writes back and says that they believe that they've allocated enough money to cover needs, we need to say, from our experience, that is not true. So I would urge that the chair writes to the DfE and copies the members of Parliament and asks the members of Parliament for their response.
Thank you, Councillor. Very helpful. Jagdeep.
I would like to add that I think we should also make sure when we are writing our letters that we are using the language that is really persuasive to them. We should be talking about the fact that there would be supporting small businesses in doing this, especially at this time. A lot of the organisations that are funded through this funding will fold if the funding doesn't actually meet their needs soon. And it's not in anyone's interests that childcare provision comes to an end, because that will stop any recovery from taking place.
Yeah, thank you, Jagdeep. Point noted there. And so I think we've got, if we move this on now, so I think if we go back to the paper, and I think we've got a few things to add here. I asked the committee to note the report and the recommendations in 3.1 to consider. Schools Forum is asked to note the methodology used to arrive at the budgets and hourly rate of £7.05 for providers in 22-23, and the subsequent information there, as well as 3.2 to note that the budget set aside for contingency is prudent and strikes a balance between providing a safeguard for managing fluctuations and maximising the amount passed to providers. And to note the reduction in funding for maintained nurseries in line with reduced allocations 22-23. And finally, 3.4, well, not finally, Schools Forum to consider the content of this report and agree the hourly rate of £7.5 to be paid to providers of early years childcare and education 22-23 as set out in Appendix A. And if we add in another action, and that is for council and or chair forum and forum to write to local MPs, DfE, to lobby for an increase in funding for early years budgets and actually everything else, to be honest, but specifically on this item. Poonam, is there anything else on that?
Yes, thank you. So Michelle had some queries right at the start of forum because I don't think her mic's still working. So if I just quickly address those.
Yeah.
So her first question was, what happens to any unspent contingency money at the end of the budget year? So any underspends are carried forward and then redistributed in the following year once we've got our final allocations following Schools Forum approval. Her second question was, what is the percentage decrease in the M&S for 22-23 compared to 21-22, and what does that mean in real terms? So the percentage decrease is a 5% reduction in the maintained nursery supplement, and that will need to be reflected in the payments that are made out to the maintained nurseries. Has the SENIF budget been increased in 22-23, as it appears that the budget for 21-22 was not high enough? So the SENIF budget has remained the same as this financial year. The SENIF panel are reviewing the criteria, the amounts per band, and the approval process to access this funding, and we're hoping that this will mitigate against any future overspends against this budget. And in table 4 at the appendix 1 on the left hand column, it says contingency is 3, but the legend says 4. So which one is it? So contingency for this budget is 4%. So apologies for the typo, that will be corrected, but those figures are based on 4%.
Yeah, thank you, Poonam, for the clarity on that. And if we can note those items in 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, 3.4, and the addition of one. Hannah, did you get the addition of lobbying government?
Yes, Chair, I'll pop that in the minutes and make sure that's
great. Thank you. Move on to paper A9, high needs forecast. Discussed a lot of this, so we may have already covered ground on this. So, Julie, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So this paper covers an update of the work of the High Needs Block Reference Group, the forecast and recommendations for next year's budget. The forecast, as you have already heard, 2.2 million. The main reasons for this are increasing numbers and increasing costs, and particularly drawing attention to the top-up payments and the pressure that is coming from the top-up to maintained and academy schools. The forecasts are still subject to further change as we continue to refine the data that we hold and the historic information. In terms of the top-up funding, you know, we have a high needs reference group on the 8th of February, and a very detailed paper will be presented with the findings from some particular cases that have been analysed. And as Ian highlighted, we have now moved 50% of the children across to the EBT, and there is sufficient data to be able to give us a really clear picture of what the pressure points are and where they are coming from. I'd also like to highlight the hospital school. At the last meeting, the forum noted that we'd approved the budget for the hospital school, but we've subsequently received a request for additional funding from the head and the chair of governors. Particular issues that have caused the funding pressure for them are the relocation of the hospital school to Bayswater former Children's Centre as a result of COVID. They can't operate from the hospital. Work is underway to develop a service level agreement between the local authority and the hospital school, as recommended and agreed by a previous schools forum. And the hospital school have agreed to participate in a review of their structure and costs that will be carried out via the DFE's Resource Management Advisor. In terms of the proposed budget that's set out for approval, that's in section 6. And just drawing attention to the fact that, you know, as we've heard, there isn't enough money in the system, and we are already saying that in 22-23 we are anticipating that there will be an overspend. In terms of children with EHCPs, I doubt that any colleague will be surprised to hear that autism continues to be the most prevalent needs type that we're issuing EHCPs for. We have got peaks currently in year 3 and year 10, and we are maintaining 216 of those plans for young people who are over post 16. 39 of those are for young people over 21, and there is work going on with adult social care to look at whether or not some of those costs should be recharged for young people that are receiving support, and their long-term destinations are actually adult social care. The recommendations are set out at section 9. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Do we have any questions for Julie on this paper? Peter.
Yeah, just for my information, Commission places the table in 4.2. The Bowlby Primary Autism commission places, is that addition to the new school?
Yes, the primary school hosts a specialist resource provision, and that is it caters for children with a lower level of autism than the special school.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, for clarifying that. Any other questions? Okay, so Schools Forum has asked to note the bullet points that are contained there at the end of paper A9. I won't read through them all. I think Julie's just summarised all of them very neatly in her presentation there. Okay, moving on. Oh, Ian, is this you now presenting paper A10? You've got your hand up ready to go.
It absolutely is. But just to flag, if I could, and just to add to Julie's point, we really welcome everyone's attendance at the High Needs Review Group. I know it's on the 8th of February. We've sometimes struggled a little bit for full attendance, knowing how busy everybody is. But given there's, as Julia's flagged, there's so much for us to discuss, we really welcome the teachers' views at that meeting on the 8th of Feb. So I hope to see everyone there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. And right back to you on A10, which is primary school surplus capacity ISOS recommendations. Over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. It is a brief paper, and I'll be fairly brief. I know Anita's just going to say something briefly about the financial monitoring and support as well. So I know the report was requested last time. I think what we'd always want to do in terms of these updates is assess and report on progress against the original ISOS recommendations. So with regard to spare places, the recommendation was that 1 to 2 forms of entry in primary should be removed. And you'll see in section 2, in fact, under section 2.4, as many of you will know, one of those 2 forms of entry has already been agreed to be removed with effect from this September at St Mary's Roman Catholic Primary School up in North Kensington. Is currently a 2-form entry school, will move to a 1-form entry. So yes, there's absolutely active discussion, I guess, with schools with spare capacity to consider whether they may want to move to temporary capping in 1 or more year groups, whether they might want to move to temporary capping across the school, and whether that might be the best thing to do and beneficial to those schools' budgets to consider a permanent move. That doesn't mean, of course, that those places are lost forever. The building size is still the building size, if you like, but if there are budget challenges or predicted budget challenges, it may be helpful to consider that move. So when those changes, if those changes are agreed by governing bodies, they would of course be reported back to Forum and also to the Education Partnership Board. But as I say, in terms of the recommendation, we are halfway there. Nevertheless, the autumn census data does show that spare capacity overall in primaries is at 15.4%. The DFE would recommend 5 to 10%, as you will know, and you'll see there in 1.1, the second bullet point, that actually the surplus in the north in primaries is 20%, and it's 9.5% in the south. So we need to be mindful of that and continue those discussions. I hope it'll be music to Amanda's ears as the chair of the working group that's met previously, who's given her time. So it's that, it wouldn't be my advice we reconvene the working group at this stage. I don't think there's enough for us to discuss. Frankly, I'm seeing a nod. I'm glad I've got that nod from you, Amanda. But we need to absolutely monitor the situation closely. And I think also, Anita, you'd want to say something about the financial monitoring and support and where we are with that. So over to you, Anita.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah, so following the recommendations in the ISOS review around the tighter financial planning. So I know that, well, we've got an additional financial consultancy advisor available, and he has been supporting a number of schools, and it's been it's looking, well, it's been promising that schools are coming forward quite early as they're starting to see budget pressures in the future, rather than waiting till there's a deficit, which is what we all want to be, that the issues are dealt with as soon as possible. So should anyone else need this additional advice, by all means, please do contact me and I'll put you in contact with him. And then also, you remember at March, the last March forum, we'd agreed, Forum had agreed the purchase of some software for multi-year budget planning. and it's taken us a while to get the contract sorted, but we're now at the start of rolling that out to all of the maintained schools. I mean, I don't think I need to repeat the other things that have been discussed at forum, and the item about the scheme we can discuss under the scheme paper.
Okay, thank you, Anita. Amanda?
Yeah, I'm just mindful of the point that was made by David and Sarah agreed with, that some schools are obviously, should we say, protected, at least in the first year, because of the Afghan evacuees. And I just wonder generally whether the local authority is looking at, should we say, sort of ghost budgets for the next few years, assuming that, you know, going forward, that isn't the same situation. And equally, perhaps, and maybe there's a little bit of guesswork, but given that we are having some modelling on the numbers of pupils, etc., that we can look to the next 2-3 years to see which schools then become at risk, so that we start to support those schools now, if indeed we're not already.
Good questions, Amanda. So in relation to the looking forward and not just looking at what's the funding looking like for 22-23. So now that schools have to do 3-year budget planning, obviously what schools do, and then, you know, we work with and confirm, is that they'll have an increase in 1 year for the Afghan evacuees, and then we'd see, if we weren't seeing the numbers go down again, we would be questioning that. We know it's much more difficult to work out what the trend is on individual schools, or sorry, what the actual numbers might be on individual schools, but we try and work, you know, closely with schools as to what their view is in the light of the overall trends in reductions, particularly in the north, as to what that will look like on their budget. So it is done with individual schools, and both, you know, for the view of their governing body, and then for our view as to anything that we think is not looking realistic.
Thanks, Anita. Peter?
Yeah, just for clarification, is there any difference between federating a school as described in 223 and amalgamating a school as set out in 2.5? I'm unclear as to the difference.
I'm happy to. I think, Sarah, you put your hand up first. Shall I answer first? Is that okay, Andrew?
Yes, go for it.
Yeah, they are different pieces. That's a helpful point. So a federation, there used to be different types of federation, but now there's one type of federation, and that would be you know, 2 schools continuing as separate entities, but having a single governing body replacing each school's separate governing body. Often, but not always, that would be accompanied by having a single head teacher across 2 or more schools in a federation. So that's a federation. Schools remain separate entities, inspected separately, although perhaps aligned, separate budgets and so on, but a single governing body. And amalgamation would be the bringing together of 2 schools. In DFE language, that would be about closure and enlargement. In this scenario, and I can give you an example from Westminster, where we also work an amalgamation proposal there involving 2 Roman Catholic primary schools. That's currently out for the final formal stage of consultation, and that proposal is about discontinuing one school, retaining the other school. All children at the school to be discontinued get a guaranteed place at the amalgamated school, and then all children over time are educated on a single site, and that removes one form of entry. There are no proposals coming forward from schools at the current time in Kensington, Chelsea, you know, in that area, but we have put that, you know, as a potential option to be considered. And I think it links to everybody's earlier points about continuing to keep this as a priority, mindful of the point Amanda's made around the temporary uplift, both in terms of roll numbers and budget of the Afghan evacuees, because we know the projections are not good for primary. They continue to be as they have been over the past few years.
Thank you, Ian.
No problem.
Thanks, Ian. Sarah, over to you.
Yeah, I guess I was just probably done it again. Add to that just briefly, and Amanda, it goes to your point, and really the work with ISOS is trying to get us on the front foot of this, rather than the situation worsening and worsening, and us having limited choices about what we can do. So really, this is about getting on the front foot. There are options for schools to take, and it's about us, strategically having a look at this through the education partnership, thinking about the budget implications through Schools Forum, but obviously decisions are being made by individual schools in consultation with their governing bodies and the diocese as appropriate.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Jagdeep.
I'm just looking at the paper, and what it doesn't do is it doesn't talk about where we're going next, apart from a couple of different areas around amalgamations, etc. It doesn't really set out what we'll do when we've got the data for reception admissions for this year. And one of the things that we said as a group in ISOS was that when we get that information, we've got that data and the real data, not just projections, we may need to start taking more evasive action, and for the local authority to start driving that even more. I suppose really, I'd like a bit more really in the next meeting on what we're going to do, because I'm very worried that things are starting to actually move at a greater pace than even ISOS thought.
Yeah, thank you, Jagdeep. I think we also need to just be careful about what our powers are as a forum on this. We've also got the Educational Partnership Board, and really, I think we have to allow officers to negotiate and discuss with governing bodies, and I think it's essential that we allow them to do that job and then report back how that's going, as opposed to us as a forum making the decisions, because we can't supersede governing bodies on that front. Ian, is there anything else on that?
Well, I think just picking on Jagdeep's points, I think we have reported in, new news, if you like, the confirmed October census figures for primary in terms of spare capacity. We had actually projected 15% spare capacity, and we were pretty much spot on. We were 1% off in Westminster. We can absolutely look at more detailed data with Wendy and the team, and if there's a viewer forum, Amanda will have a view. Do we need to reconvene the working group to to consider these issues in more detail and share practice, share what's happening? We can absolutely do that. My view perhaps will be not quite at this stage, but I'm open to forum's views. And I think Andrew's point is absolutely spot on. I think the role of the forum is to look at the financial impact and the projected financial impact of falling roles, and particularly where we see 3-year budget planning perhaps being difficult for some schools, and then making sure that support and challenge is in place where needed.
Okay, thank you. Amanda, over to you, and then I think for time purposes we're going to have to move this discussion on. Amanda.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that in the working group we were very frustrated by the notion of we didn't quite know what power we had, what we were there for, how we interacted with Forum, how we interacted with the Education Partnership Board, and it all seemed to go round and round in circles with everybody saying somebody else was going to make the decision. What very, very strongly came out of everything, I sit on the Educational Partnership Board, I sit on Forum, it is clear from each of these entities the only entity that can make a decision is actually the council itself, the full council. So what we can do in Forum is we can make recommendations to the council to make a decision about what happens to a school, but nobody else can. It's not the Educational Partnership Board and it isn't Forum. So working group can inform this forum, and I'm sure I'd be delighted along with other working group members to do any work that Forum thinks fit in the future. And I totally get Jagdeep's point. There's no point in making a decision in a working group that we will reconvene and work when the data comes out. If when the data comes out, we then don't do anything. So if Forum thinks we shouldn't do, that's absolutely fine. But I think it's wrong just to kicking things into touch, but being mindful of what we can do. Sorry, that was a bit round about the house, but there you go.
Thank you, Amanda. I think my view is that there's no need to reconvene the working party. I think the working party was set up to look at the parameters around what are the trigger points, what are the issues, and establish the issues and bring those back to forum. And I think that work was scrutinised and done by the working party. I think we're in danger of having too many chiefs and too many boards and too many people looking at things. We've got the forum here that looks at predominantly finances, but aspects of school organisation. And at the point that the working party was set up, there wasn't the Educational Partnership Board, and actually that the progress of the Educational Partnership Board was slightly stymied by COVID and issues in terms of getting up and running that we had talked about and discussed at the last meeting. I do think, though, that my understanding, and I see Sarah's put her hand up here, is that really the first port of call is it's got to be a collaboration with school governing bodies, as opposed to council deciding and superseding governing bodies. I don't think anyone involved in education wants to see necessarily council deciding to reduce form of entry without consultation or discussion from a council. I think that will be a very, very dangerous position to find ourselves in. Sarah,
yeah, I was just going to reinforce that, Andrew, that there's absolutely no way that the council is going to make these decisions without actually it going through the proper process and it being a recommendation of the school, the governing body, to the council of the action that it wants to take.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. I think this is there's going to be an awful lot more conversation around this, and I'm mindful of time, the fact that we've got 15 minutes left, and I think we could probably go on forever about school organisation and some of the issues that are being faced, but we have got the Educational Partnership Board, and I think we're probably going to continue to come back to this. So I think really now we just need to note the progress update regarding ISOS recommendations for primary school surplus capacity, and certainly we'll need to look at this coming back again. Okay, if we move on to item A11, scheme for financing schools, I know that both Peter and Amanda have got some notes on this, but I'm handing over to Poonam on this one. Poonam, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So a very short report, albeit with the longest appendices. So this report seeks approval to consult with Maintained Schools on a proposed change to the scheme for financing schools. The proposal is to bring forward the deadline for submission of 3-year budget forecasts from the last working day of May to the first working day of May from next financial year. Currently, the budget plans are received 2 months into the financial year, and the proposal to bring this forward by a month will help identify schools that need to review their costs earlier, jump in with any support from us earlier, and give more time for any mitigating actions to take effect. The 2 appendices attached to this report are the current scheme and the proposed scheme with the track changes in section 2.3. That's it on that one.
Okay, Peter, do you want to highlight and flag here? I know that you've copied Anita in already. Do you want to flag?
I have received representations from my school, Avondale. I guess I should declare an interest. I have 2 concerns on this. The first is broad concern in that you're putting more pressure here on senior business managers who've got enough to do already, and the governance structures generally. And what I want Forum to consider is, and this may be, we consider it on the 23rd of March, is what is the balance between getting this data early and putting more pressure on the school's finance officers and finance processes. The second issue, which I really am very concerned about, is this rapid introduction proposal, which you intend to produce at introduced it in 2022-3. Now, first of all, the meetings are already set. The finance meetings and the main governing body meetings are already set in 22-23. And in my opinion, well, I know that many of my governors, you know, who've got busy diaries, other commitments, and this will, any shifts will cause problems. And the second point is that this particular year, Easter is late in the, you know, in the general scheme of how Easter is determined. And the Easter Sunday is on the 17th of April. So you're actually asking to take a decision on March the 23rd, and then many people will be off at Easter, and we've got to submit budgets by May the 1st. I just don't think for this year it's tenable. Thank you.
Well, officers, I'll hand back over to you, but I think what Peter said seems pretty reasonable given the circumstances. So can amendments be made to the scheme to ensure that we support business managers, school leaders with this?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Peter. Point taken and very well made. I think in terms of the additional pressure and things, that was not the intention of this at all. Obviously, we're here to support when needed. We can start the processes earlier and things. I think it's a very good point about this financial year, and absolutely, I think it would be wise if we did postpone it to the year after, but at least get the meetings in place for next financial year in line with this new deadline, hopefully. Anywhere we can support in that as well, or where there's schools struggling with meeting these deadlines, absolutely we'll step in and provide that support as well. Yeah, that's all I have to say on that one.
Great, thank you, Poona, much appreciated on that. Sarah, over to you.
So I'd like to say that I agree with everything Peter says and fully support that. But just to add to the fact that there is really a lot of pressure being put on school business managers. You're asking for more and more reports from them every month. There is more and more they're being expected to do. And we're finding that we're actually getting to the point where we need to fund an additional admin person in our team because of the demands that are being made on them. So I just think this is another thing that is making life very difficult for school business managers. And I can, you know, having talked to colleagues, I can see that there's a problem with recruiting school business managers at the moment as well. And I think this is just another kind of thing that would put them off wanting to do the job. So I think I really, really strongly disagree with us moving forward this proposal. Oh, and can I also just add that you have lots of other ways in the borough of finding out the information if schools are struggling, because we're already reporting once a month to you on our balance positions. So surely that should be adequate for you to know where schools are going wrong or right.
Can I just come in? You know, that I take Sarah's points, and you know, there is a lot of pressure on school business managers. That's correct, and we are, as you know, we are trying to streamline things and automate things. I know there's been some issues with that, but we're going to be doing a lot more work on that. But this is, I mean, the budget plans are key because it's the first time that we see, obviously the figures change from the 3-year budget plan. Also, there's already, I certainly agree that we put this off. We certainly don't suggest trying to do this from this April. I agree with Poonam on that. But effectively, schools can use the budgets from this forum meeting, which would mean that there's more than 3 months to work on the school budget plan. So it won't work if the governing body meetings aren't in line with that. But I think, and I just think making it any longer does not make good business sense. And we're you know, in the previous paper, one of the things is trying to strengthen our processes around financial management. We haven't got it right yet, Sarah. I agree on terms of some of the other things, but for me, this is quite key, and these are the sort of timetables that I've been used to working with in other boroughs, but not from this, not changing it from this May, beginning of this May.
Okay, thank you, Anita. I think it may, judging from what people are saying and what's written in the comment box, I don't think it's necessarily about timescales, which you're right about, Anita. I think it's just finding potentially better ways of working together with schools to streamline some of the processes, make it easier on the pressures. I think probably particularly the primary schools are feeling. Amanda, over to you. You've got your hand up.
Sure. I'm sorry, I disagree. I don't think it's just about the pressures and the processes behind. Governors have to convene, they have to consider this is a well-run borough, and if we differ from other boroughs, well, great, because we're getting the time so that we can consider properly. We work very hard on our budgets to do a good job on our budgets, and I don't want to try and shoehorn governor meetings into, we only have one meeting where we might have two and do the job properly. I see no reason whatsoever to change from the deadline of 31st of May.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. Peter? Oh, Peter, you're on mute.
Sorry, I've lowered my hand. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, Anita, we're coming back to this, aren't we?
I suppose it's whether the forum agree that we go out to consultation on, to all maintained schools on an amended proposal. That's what we're asking now.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think we do need to go out to consultation on this. Given some of the comments that we're hearing, I think we need to gather some of the views from some of our wider colleagues across RBKC, certainly head teachers, school business managers. So I think, is it possible to have, when it goes out to consultation, Anita, have some of the options that have been discussed here and an option of the two different proposals based on the dates that we've got?
So my understanding is the option, we would be changing the proposal to not until May 2023. Otherwise, the date doesn't change at all. So I think the consultation would be as simple as, does it change from May 24 or not? Not at all. Yeah,
OK. I think obviously Peter's points at the start stand. And I think in terms of this year, it's just it's not workable and it's not feasible. And I think that there seemed to be complete consensus around that. So my proposal is that we go with what Peter had suggested during in terms of what he said in terms of this year, and that we look at a proposal for how things will run in 23-24. Is that correct?
Yep, that's acceptable to me.
Okay.
Can I just ask, when it goes out on page 60, we change Sire Manning to All Saints, do you think, please? Because that hasn't been done for the last 2 years.
Absolutely, yes. Apologies, Amanda.
Okay.
May I also just flag up what Amanda said? I think what needs to go out in the consultation also is the value of the change. Why? Anita, if you've explained why, but I think one of the things from your side is be really, really clear about the advantages. I think somebody said you can leap in, to help. Well, actually, I think that needs to be articulated, because that is a further part of the consultation, whether whether it happens at all. And I think it's really important to give people the opportunity to see the rationale for that, and to make a decision accordingly, and to give their feedback. Thank you.
I think it's a really good idea. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that seems really good, Chris. Peter?
Just one final question. Sorry, when we get the national funding formula numbers, or let's switch over to the national funding formula, how early do you think we're going to get the figures from government? Because that, I've seen governments before lag on figures. Are we gonna have to revisit it at that point?
I think we'd probably have to revisit
everything.
Lots of things.
Yeah.
Okay. And we won't, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. I think obviously that's. I mean, that's something that we're all looking forward to, aren't we?
You've been very frivolous now. Very playful.
It's like, yeah, that's kind of going to happen. Hannah, have you got all of those notes on scheme for financing schools there? What we're proposing we're going to do? Is it possible for you to summarise?
Sure. Give me one moment. Okay.
Thank you.
Am I correct in saying that the recommendation is that we continue with running or looking to run in 2023-24, but we're not looking to run this process this year because it's not feasible for the reasons that Peter laid out? Is that correct with everyone?
Yes, the changes are not, and the timescales are not feasible.
Yes, and I think you were also asking for in the consultation to maybe continue to consider this point or put options around this. And I'm not sure if that's feasible with officers, but could they confirm, please?
Can I just say, I think, from my point of view, going out to consultation, your summary assumes that it's going to happen in 23-24. It may well, but I think if it's going out to consultation, and part of that consultation is the value of it happening at all, then so a cat walking across.
Yeah, I just saw that too.
I think just if you could sort of slightly tweak that, so that because actually there's nothing more annoying than a consultation coming out when it appears as though decision's already been made. So
yeah,
just a slight tweak, but otherwise that was perfect. Thanks.
Noted. Thank you. Are forum members in agreement with that?
Agreed.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. That is there any other business? Okay. Well, that concludes the schools forum for January. Thank you, everybody, and I look forward to seeing everybody in March at the next meeting. Have a good evening. Happy New Year to everyone, and see you all very soon.